elections after the ongoing primaries. Speaking to State House correspondent after an audience with President Muhammadu Buhari behind closed doors, Oshomole described the exercise being held across the country as a standard of reference.
Nobody can hold APC to ransom. Our president is leading by example by subjecting himself not to fake petitions, subjecting himself to the dictates of APC ordinary members. With such a leadership, we don't need to look for role models in terms of going forward what we need to do better.
The APC national chairman, who announced the rejection of the Imo governorship primaries, confirmed that the National Working Committee of the party monitored the exercise in Lagos, contrary to insinuations in some quarters.
Control and supervision and directions of the NWC. Our democracy has to grow and move on.
And as the National Assembly resumes from recess next week, Mr. Oshomole maintains his position that minority rule cannot be accepted in the parliament. That's the news. Good Morning Nigeria continues after this break with Kingsley and myself in a moment.
Unemployment, notably youth unemployment, features strongly in our party's manifesto. We intend to attack the problem frontally through revival of agriculture.
The 30K is going a long way. Actually, I bought an acre of land for 60K like 2012, and presently I have a cassava farm and a yam farm.
Reorganized, trained, and fully equipped, we are the new improved Nigeria Police Force. We fight crime, we bust syndicates. Whatever the crime, wherever the hideout, the Nigeria Police Force will get you busted. Stop kidnapping, armed robbery, murder, pipeline vandalism, and other criminal activities. Be productive. Be security conscious. Join the police force to secure your life and property. This message is from the Nigeria Police Force Public Relations Department.
These days, people get their news and information from more media sources than ever before. Some of the news and information given are fake, unverified, doctored, and manufactured to create confusion, stir disaffection, and cause disunity. Before you believe or share any news, ask yourself, is this real? Is it from a credible source? Is it verified or verifiable? Fake news is dangerous. Whether you do it for fun or for political gains, real people can get hurt. Fake news, don't create it, don't spread it.
This is a public service announcement from NTA.
Winning in hot and dry conditions is hard. Causes the body to sweat, which attracts germs that are easily passed from one person to another.
What keeps you so cool, man?
Dettol Cool combines Dettol's protection and an invincible icy feel. For super cool confidence, use Dettol Cool.
Dettol soap is now also available for 100 Naira only.
You in the air-conditioned office with the itchy throat. Strepsils. girl in the spotlight with the raspy throat. Strepsils. You in the pollution. Yes, you. Dry throat. Strepsils. Hello in the downpour with the scratchy throat. Take Strepsils. Strepsils, with its soothing medicinal ingredients, will heal the harm done to your throat from external factors. Strepsils! Strepsils! Strepsils, for a dry, itchy, raspy, scratchy throat.
All right, welcome back. And it's still Good Morning Nigeria reaching you on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. Now it's time for us to take some business stories, with miners applauding President Buhari's intervention programs in the subsector. Details of these stories and more with our correspondent Joy Uzo.
It's good to have you join us on Business News. We'll start with the solid minerals sector. Nigeria miners say they have never had it so good until the inception of this administration. Chairman Zamfara State Chapter, Miners Association of Nigeria, Alhaji Sani Shinkafi, stated this while speaking on NTA's business and economy program, The Portfolio. They particularly commended President Muhammadu Buhari for the different intervention programs that have started reorganizing the solid minerals sector, therefore making it more attractive. However, they urged the federal government to hasten up with a review of the guidelines for accessing some of the funds, especially that of the Bank of Industry.
If you say an artisanal miner, somebody who's staying in a remote area where there is no road network, where there is no GSM network, where there is no light, are you expecting to give you a collateral before you assess a loan of 10 million, 50 million to 100 million? Why will he get the collateral that will cover that security? And you tell him that he has to go to CAC and register a company. And it is also difficult for any artisanal miner to come to Abuja in the mining cadastre to say he come to register as a miner. So these are some of the challenges, the criteria and the assessment of the loan, the documentation or a loan, it is too cumbersome.
Into other areas, the nation's foreign exchange reserves fell by $1.457 billion in September. This was reviewed on the latest data released by the Central Bank of Nigeria. The external reserves, which stood at $45.838 billion at the end of August, declined to $44.380 billion on September 27, 2018. Figures from the CBN had earlier revealed that the reserves, which had continued to go down in recent months, fell by $990.98 million from $47.11 billion in July to $46.128 billion on August 23, 2018. The CBN noted that the evolution of the forex market in the country had been influenced by a number of factors, such as the changing pattern of international trade, institutional changes in the economy, and structural shifts in production. Now to the equities markets. Trading on the floor of the Nigerian Stock Exchange opens first trading day of the week Tuesday in the red, with the NSE All-Share Index depreciating by 0.17% to close at 32,711.65 basis points. Next is a graphic representation of the closing figures. That does it on Business News. Thank you for watching. I am Joy Uzo.
Thank you, Joy. Now it's time to review the dailies.
All right, our newspaper reviewer, Bayo Atoyebe, is with us here in the studios. We have very few papers this morning. for our review segment. Bayo, good morning and welcome to the program.
Thank you, Kinsley. Good morning. Good morning, Femi. And good morning, Nigeria.
All right, Femi, let me begin with the Nigerian Pilot newspaper. The Nigerian Pilot is busy with a number of headlines on the front page, most of it politics, and the primaries ahead of the 2019 general election. That's the Nigerian Pilot. Let's just begin straight away from the headlines immediately below the nameplate. Ben Murray Bruce quits Bayelsa senatorial race. That's on page 7. And then Senate, that's the story that is beside it. APC disqualifies ex-Inspector General of Police Abba and clears outgoing governors and others. Shehu Sani emerges sole candidate. And Senator Uzodinma cleared for Imo West. That's on page 5, according to the paper. There are other versions of that story. 2019 governorship. That's the GUBA, of course, for short. That's 2019 governorship. 4 riders. Battle for government houses nationwide begins as major parties, APC, PDP, elect candidates. Former FCT ministers Bala Mohammed, Jerry Hussaini, Emeka Ihedioha, and others in the race. Jerry Hussaini, of course, we talked about his story yesterday. Wike, Ganduje, Masari, Bazu, Otom, Bagudu, El-Rufai, and others seek second term. They already have the tickets of their parties. And then you have the photograph there on the front page of the Nigerian Pilot newspaper. Cry freedom for Lieb Sharibu. That says, make your voice heard with regard to Lieb Sharibu, who is the sole abductee still with the Boko Haram that stormed Yobe State earlier in the year. Cry freedom for Lieb Sharibu. Now, below that, you have another headline again on politics. And it says, again, crisis ma APC governorship primaries in Lagos and Imo. Oshomole and panel disagree on Lagos outcome. That's one writer. And says Imo primaries results fake. Details of that can be found on page 7. Insecurity. That's the headline immediately below that headline. It says Lalong laments killings and other security operatives to fish out some of the other headlines. All right, so let's go to...
politics. But before Bayo goes into that, thank God that you have, while our newspapers still have space for human angle stories, and that's the area I will go into in the Punch as we take a very concerned story of a man jumping into Lagos Lagoon. It's on page 4 of the Punch. A man jumps into Lagos Lagoon and dies, and this is one thing that is becoming so very common in Lagos. The lagoon, which is supposed to be an environmental joy for people, is becoming a source of people taking their lives. Also on page 4 of the Punch, we see toddler stolen in Lagos, sold in Delta. Another human angle story on page 4 of the Punch. Bayo, we can go.
It's a very sad story about a person jumping into the pool. Also in Lagos, another sad story was that an articulated tanker was going towards Lagos-Badagry Expressway. It ran into a minibus and spilled its 33,000 liters of petrol. Hoodlums gathered and were trying to create dams to stop the petrol from flowing so that they could collect it. Unfortunately, it ignited fire. Luckily, no lives were lost, but at least 10 vehicles were burnt. And that is a development that is very worrying. You recall that there was a similar tanker explosion that spilled petrol and killed several persons on the Lagos Badagry. This was Lagos Badagry, but it was Oshodi Expressway very recently. However, some passengers that were traveling in an 18-seater bus from Lagos to Jigawa were not that lucky. Just when they were approaching Abuja about 2 a.m., the driver ran into a stationary articulated van. The bus burst into flame. Only one person was saved. The others, unfortunately, burned. However, the driver and his boy quickly detached the head of the truck and drove away as the fire was on. The vehicle number was given as DKA 871ZU. The Road Safety Commission should be able to track down the driver for that kind of criminal act. Meanwhile, like the reports that were read, primaries have been going on, and because of primaries and the consent by the Federal Executive Council, no Federal Executive Council will be held today. A cross-section of the reports across the nation shows that for the All Progressive Congress, 9 incumbent governors have been returned, and there have been 15 new ones. For the PDP, 8 incumbent governors have been returned, and 7 new ones are to contest. There were also incidences of parallel primaries. For the APC, parallel primaries in Ogun State, Rivers, Delta, and Cross River. For the PDP, reported double parallel primaries in Rivers, Delta, and also Cross River. There was also protest by persons in the Ekiti State. There was a story that Kingsley read about Imo State, that Hope Uzodinma has been declared as a winner. The national chairman of the APC has declared the result, declared the Imo primaries as fake. So the controversy still goes on. Lagos is still very uncertain.
All right, Bayo, thanks. There's a story on page 5 of the Daily Trust newspaper, right at the foot of the paper, and the story concerns the tremors. It's a continuation, perhaps, of the tremors that were reported some weeks ago. Now, the story is headlined, "Panic over volcanic-like incident in FCT." You can see the story there. It says, residents of Mpape area of the Federal Capital Territory have reported a volcanic eruption-like incident with some inflammable substances emitting smoke from the cliff of the hills in the area. That incident occurred yesterday. So the DG of the NGSA, that's Nigeria Geological Survey Agency, urged the residents not to panic, as this is not the kind of environment where you see volcanic eruption. The Minister of Solid Minerals also said samples have been taken and they will be analyzed to determine exactly what happened. Bayo, you recall Mpape was the epicenter of a tremor some weeks ago.
Yes, there was a tremor that was reported, and it raised alarm because the city, in fact, it happened over a period of about 3 days, and people were very worried, and because it happened from 2:30 in the afternoon, and it continued across the next day. But the incidences, from all indications and from all information, the Minister of the FCT has said that residents in Mpape should not be alarmed because the impact on the Richter scale was about 0.3, which is very, very minimal. Tremors are minor earthquakes, but heavy earthquakes that always occasion heavy death tolls goes into the range of 7.2, 7.5 on the Richter scale. So if we are 0.3, although there's concern to monitor tremors if they are there, it is not as alarming as when they get to the 7.1 Richter. The latest development is also a suspicion about smoke emanating from hillside. Wherever you have volcanic activities, there's usually a crater from where such emerges. And sometimes we tend to forget there are people who are in the habit of making coal. And what do? They usually dig deep pits, pile in logs of wood, set it ablaze, and cover it up. So you find fire burning underground and the smoke bailing out. And after several days, they come out with their coal. This may not be the situation, but experts say that the environment is not indicative of environment for volcanic activity. But caution should not be thrown to the wind, and the experts are looking into that.
Well, Bayo, if you recall, I mean, you were off at the time when the tremors occurred, and we took it as an item for conversation on Good Morning Nigeria. We had a number of experts who did indicate that, yes, Abuja could be susceptible, the Federal Capital Territory susceptible to tremors.
Kingsley, when we're talking about the Mpape and Abuja events, I hope experts too are keeping on record and putting records together, because 3 years ago we had a more dangerous one in Kafanchan, where houses were beginning to cave in as a result of earth tremors and all that.
That's so right. Our guests actually refer to that.
We're supposed to put together now,
yes,
and study
as part of the data that
yes.
they have. Indeed, there was reference to that incident that occurred in Kaduna. Now, if assuming this is smoke emitting from the hillside, I don't know. Well, this is not an issue that we have touched on, and experts have not been asked to interrogate it. You also have some very dormant volcanoes.
Yes.
there are dormant volcanoes, and if they want to get active, how do you know? You talked about a crater. That your crater you will find normally for an active volcano. Yes. But if this occurred millions of years ago and it has been dormant, what are the indications that something just might be going wrong? But there's also the possibility of what you said with regard to persons, trying to make coal and the processes that they normally would go through to get that done. But it's a wake-up call, indeed, as you have indicated, for all of that. That's one point to make about the fire tanker incident again in Lagos. Yes. A topic that we have also discussed on Good Morning Nigeria. There's something about the new Badagry Expressway. It's Gomo Badagry Expressway. And sometimes this is part of the reason why you're having choking traffic on that axis. The median is so oppressive now that if you miss a turning point, for a U-turn or a diversion, you have to go several kilometers ahead of you. Sometimes well past, I think they call it a Lakija or so, bus stop before you go and make a U-turn. So you find the choking traffic, and I think it's advisable for the authorities to review this and see how they can create more turning points along the median points. And you find that also in some major cities. All in a bid to create traffic. Now you have a continuous median, and vehicles now congregate at a point where you have traffic lights, and if they are working, fine. If they are not working, then it's absolute bedlam.
Yeah, sometimes the challenge is also about knowing the rules on the highway itself. For instance, even this morning while I was coming to the office, I noticed that you have a truck heavily loaded with goods driving on what is described as the fast lane. And it's going at the slow speed, so you find others driving and sneaking through the traffic because they want to pass. So most often than not, people who are ignorant on the highway are driving on the highway, and they tend to think that if you have a multi-lane, it is your choice. Pick anywhere you want and drive as you want on any of it, but it's not the case. So there's need for serious education for our drivers on our highways.
All right, Bayo, that's the much that we can take. We're having to discuss Nigeria's economic odyssey. 58 years on. We'd like to thank you. See you tomorrow.
Tomorrow will be another day. Thank you.
Okay, it's Good Morning Nigeria. We'll take a short break now. When we return, we'll take on our conversation segment.
Fake news which is shared for malicious purposes is a danger to our peace and security in Nigeria. Misinformation as fake news is a serious threat to our hard-earned democracy and promotes hatred and misunderstanding between our communities. We are all responsible for stopping the spread of fake news in its tracks. So, always check the source and credibility of any news item. Say no to fake news. This message is brought to you by the Federal Ministry of Information.
To the outer framers, the hat tippers, the fringe goers, you don't need to hide anymore. Try Dettol Even Tone. It cleans and helps to reduce the appearance of blemishes caused by oil, dirt, and germs, giving your skin a healthy feel for an even better you. Dettol, be 100% sure.
Dettol soap is now also available for 100 Naira only.
These days, people get their news and information from more media sources than ever before. Some of the news and information given are fake, unverified, doctored, and manufactured to create confusion, stir disaffection, and cause disunity. Before you believe or share any news, ask yourself, is this real? Is it from a credible source? Is it verified or verifiable? Fake news is dangerous. Whether you do it for fun or for political gains, real people can get hurt. Fake news, don't create it, don't spread it.
This is a public service announcement from NTA. Hate speech is not a joke. It incites genocide and crimes against humanity. Most of Africa's civil wars are caused by hate speech from one tribe against another. We don't want it here. The Nigerian government stands firm against hate speech.
Under no conditions whatsoever should we tolerate or excuse or justify hate speech or hateful conduct of any kind, especially where such is illegal.
There's no doubt that the resurgent push for separatism, as well as the rising cases of ethnic and religious disharmony, are all traceable to the growing phenomenon of hate speech.
One nation bound in freedom, peace and unity.
Nigeria, one nation, one people.
This is a public service announcement brought to you by NTA.
Madam. Brought us as usual.
As usual. You have no problem.
You
are welcome, sir.
As usual, yeah?
You take that one. You take that one. You don't understand? We want Nigerian homegrown rice. Finish. You don't have.
Join the rice revolution today.
No other rice that tastes like Nigerian rice. Are you sorry? That's the Nigerian rice we are talking about. Chocolate made in Nigerian rice. Healthy food. I'm going to bring Mrs. Mobo to come to chocolate rice of made in Nigeria here. And see how it are made.
Correct.
How they are cook it.
Correct.
Homegrown rice are good for your health. It boosts our economy and give employment to our people.
This message is brought to you by the Federal Ministry of Information and Culture.
In case you're just joining us, this is Good Morning Nigeria, coming to you live on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. And Nigeria's economy at 58. That's what we're looking at in our discussion segment. But before we go into the discussion, let's take off with this background report from Garba Mohammed Nata'ala.
Independence in the 1960s, Nigeria's economy seemed very promising, with agriculture as the mainstay of the nation's economy, providing the largest foreign exchange. It contributed about 63% to the nation's gross domestic product, GDP. The incomes were derived from the export of major cash crops, such as rubber, cocoa, palm oil, cashew nuts, groundnut, and cotton, among others. However, Nigeria's economy shifted to oil as a result of boom in that sector in the 70s to the 80s. That accounted for nearly 87% of exports, becoming the main source of federal government's revenue. Rail systems served as the safest means of transportation, particularly for haulage. Terminal stations in Lagos, Calabar, Port Harcourt, Kaduna, Kano, and Maiduguri became not only a hub of commerce and trade, but served as center of national unity. The fall in oil prices, decline in output, occasioned by the discovery of oil in more countries and development of alternatives led to lull in the sector. 80% of the country's consumable products were imported, while local industries suffered neglect. The sudden crash in the price of crude oil in the international market in June 2014, Nigeria, as a mono economy, became one of the worst hit countries. Since then, the Nigerian economy has been struggling to pick up from the effects. The implementation of ERGP is gradually growing the country's economy, and diversification of the economy by the present administration is again making agriculture the mainstay of the country's economy through Green Alternative Roadmap. Other adopted policies to reduce overdependence on oil revenue using the non-oil sectors and reducing cost of imported goods are raising hope for a better economy. Experts are of the opinion that government's renewed commitment shows that the future of the country lies in agriculture, mining, and other non-oil sectors, not oil and gas. What should Nigeria do to consolidate on the gains in agriculture? Which sectors should grow Nigeria's economy? 58 years after independence, how has the country fared? Guests on Good Morning Nigeria will answer all these and more shortly.
Thank you very much, Garba Natala, for that background. We have three guests with us in the studios, and they are regular faces. And Good Morning Nigeria, whenever we are discussing economic issues. First, let's welcome Professor Ken Ife, is an economic policy analyst. Professor Ife, pleasure again to have you on Good Morning Nigeria.
Thank you for inviting me.
All right. Also here with us in the studios from the Department of Economics at the University of Abuja, Dr. Nazif Dharma is an associate professor and also a former director, National Planning Commission. Dr. Dharma, pleasure to have you with us on the program.
Good morning, Nigerians.
Okay.
And joining us, as always, is Dr. Obadiah Melafia, former Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria. Dr. Obadiah Melafia, you're welcome.
Thank you so much. Great nation, good people.
Thank you.
All right, gentlemen, thanks a lot. Let's begin one of the points touched on by our correspondent in that background, and that is to ask the question whether Nigeria's political independence has translated into escalating economic prosperity for her citizens. Professor Kenife, take the first shot.
Well, there has been progress. You wouldn't say that it's been 100%, but there's room for improvement.
Sorry, are you cold? We're cold.
No,
I'm
fine. I'm fine.
Yes.
You know, the reference was made to the good days of our fathers in the 1960s. But don't forget that it was agriculture. The great success was based on agriculture, and it was on production. It didn't actually translate to processing and manufacture. It was production. And the market was less sophisticated. International market for primary commodities were less sophisticated. Now, with the advent of WTO and rule-based systems and tightening up of quality assurance and quality conformity assessment requirements, quality infrastructure is required for us to play as hard as we played in the 60s. So it's a different terrain right now. And our forefathers then didn't actually foresee the dynamics of the economy that we are facing today. That what the oil was going to bring, the oil sector, they didn't think about, or didn't know that ICT was going to come. Even tourism was going to become a player. Nollywood eventually became. So all the service industries that now are accounting for 52% of our GDP were not actually foreseen. They never even foreseen 198 million people as a population then. And the infrastructure we had then were actually aimed at extractive solid minerals, so they didn't plan for the eventuality that these other industries were going to come. So if you look at rail, the last real investment in rail was 1927, and then it got abandoned. And rail transport is so important in moving heavy goods over long distances, and it helps highway, it helps industry, and all of those. So, you know, yes, there were good old days, but it couldn't translate to what we have today because there was no fundamental plan to expect what we're going to expect today.
Now, Dr. Nazif, you look at the past and bring it to what we have. Dr. Ken, Professor Ken just talked about using the last word, plan. Was it the lack of plan that translated into the drought which we seem to be having now?
Well, if you look at the dynamics of the world economy in the 60s, and if you look at the kind of economic policy that our forefathers have laid on, you'll be able to realize that within the context of the economic reality we are operating then, they have given this country their best. But importantly, if you look at the economy as a whole, and if you disaggregate the economy region by region, you realize that what make our forefathers to succeed and have the economic prosperity that we are yearning for is because they didn't just wake up and implement policies as we are doing today. We have a coherent national development planning culture, but most importantly, which we seems to disagree or we seems to relegate, is the fact that the quality of the political leadership, the quality of the civil service, the leadership recruitment process was excellent enough to make sure that it is only the best that emerges in political appointment, coupled with the fact that we have an economic planning policy that is consistent with the realities of that time and peacefully implemented by all actors at the federal level, at the regional level. That is why you see the tremendous development that we have then, which we are still cherishing. And we can still be able to achieve much more than what we can achieve today if every single component of the economy is working assiduously to make the necessary contribution toward sustainable national development. As it is today, it is only the federal government that is proactive. The subnational entities, only few of them are working to make realistic contribution towards national development. And I have said, I am saying, and I will continue to say, that in a country with over 190 million people, with 3 distinct federating units, if we have gone back to the culture of national development planning and embrace it as it were previously, perhaps what we could have achieved will have been much better than we have achieved. In the last 40 years, if you look at the economic cycle that we have gone through cyclical fluctuation because the major source of revenue for the economy is oil. And anytime there is a boom in the economy arising from oil price increment, you realize that the macroeconomic variables tend to go in the right direction. I beg to be disputed that it is not assiduously and deliberately orchestrated economic policy that makes those macroeconomic variables to be achieved, particularly if you look between the period of 2009 to 2011, 2014, where we have almost average of 5 to 6% GDP growth rate. It's not deliberately orchestrated economic policy, but because the oil prices were so high, there is massive injection of resources into the economy, and that is why the macroeconomic variables become right. Now, there is no certainty that the price of oil will remain high as it is. Of course, the recent increase in prices is just an opportunistic occurrence. It may not be sustained. So the reality is that beyond what we see today, what can we do differently to make the economy more viable, more resilient, more resurgent? The dynamics of the 21st century are completely different from what it was
previously. Just before we get into what we need to do, we're still exploring the broad outlines of our economic odyssey from 1960. And I would like to return to the first question I popped to Professor Kenny by asking Dr. Bedaya Melafia the same question. Has our political independence translated into escalating economic prosperity 58 years later?
Well, yes, of course, like the professor said, in some areas we have fared reasonably well. In other areas, we've actually regressed. And aviation pilots tell you it's extremely dangerous when a plane cannot continue and almost finds itself, either reversing or going backwards. Our ship of state appears to be hovering in that dangerous level, in the sense that confidence has broken down completely. 1970 January, I was a Form 1 student, 12 years of age. I arrived at the school, boarding secondary school, missionary secondary school. There was so much enthusiasm. Suddenly I heard people shouting. I said, what's the matter? They said the Civil War has ended. It was so exciting, so wonderful. Nigeria was such a glorious country. It was a happy country. It didn't have so much, mobile phones, all those things were new technologies that came later. There was no microwave, but life was wonderful. And because we didn't have the diversion of TV too much, we read and studied. You can't compare the level of today with where we were. Most undergraduates today cannot speak the secondary school English that we spoke. This is very, very sad.
Including the love poems and love letters that were
indeed,
composed.
indeed. If all the ocean were ink and all the forests were pen, they cannot express how much I love you.
Yes.
All of that was done. Nigeria was a very happy place. We discovered oil. It has its good side, but it was also disastrous in the sense that we were massively importing everything. Agriculture was neglected. We suffered from what they call the Dutch disease, whereby if you have huge amounts of hydrocarbons, you keep the exchange rate artificially high, which discourages local production, whether agriculture or industry. Look, Nigeria was at the verge of economic industrial takeoff by 1973. We were almost taking off industrially. We were getting very advanced. And my colleague, my Nazif, was right in saying that the quality of leadership mattered. The cabinet, Gawan's cabinet in 1973, you can imagine Obafemi Awolowo, Anthony Nahoro, Shehu Shagari, Dr. Elias. These were Okoye Arikpo. These were giants. There's no comparison with people of today. These were extraordinarily. Chief Simeon Adebo, you know, Ali Akilu had died, you know, but the great civil servants as well, Philip Asiodo. Like, these were giants. Today we are living with Lilliputians. I'm sorry, by comparison. So there was also a culture of planning. The first development plan was 1962 to 1968. I've studied it in material detail. There were top Harvard economists who came, worked with the Nigerian economists in designing that plan, 1962 to 1968. It really helped take off. The second National Development Plan was from 1970 to 1974, also an extremely good plan, where the 3 R's, reconciliation, rehabilitation, and reconstruction, was done. We prosecuted a tragic civil war in which 2 million of our people perished, but we prosecuted it successfully. Nigeria did not borrow $1 under Chief Obafemi Awolowo. How much are we borrowing just to prosecute some silly police action in Borno, in Adamawa, where our great soldiers drop their weapons and run away like chickens, like women? Gone are the days when Nigeria was such a great nation. So we did that, and even the rehabilitation reconstruction, we rebuilt the East, all the war-torn region. Nigeria did not borrow $1 from anywhere. These guys were highly intelligent people. They were astute people who managed people and resources so well that Nigeria did not have to borrow. Under Awolowo, you had to justify as a finance minister how you can use $1. If it was not in his plan and in his rigorous analysis, you're not going to get it, whoever you are. The third National Development Plan was from 1970 to 1974. It was also very successful. In fact, it was considered even more successful than all the others. Then the final plan was from 1981 to 85. And the military would just stop the culture of planning. The IMF and the World Bank told us that planning was bad and we should throw it away, and we foolishly agreed. In this world, nobody can understand your problems better than yourself. You should listen to others with humility. But for heaven's sakes, use your own brain, use your own knowledge to analyze your situation and to take concrete action. We have done away with the culture of planning. We have so-called rolling plans that are neither here nor there. So there is total confusion everywhere. And I'm sorry, the country has lost its direction. We have lost our sense of national purpose. We are more divided than ever. And we've made about $1 trillion from oil so far, according to my calculations. Nearly 50% of it has been stolen. Almost $500 billion have been stolen in this country and taken out of the country. No, a lot of that money will not come back.
But Dr. Obadiah Melafia, thank you very much for your insights. I'm sure there are some of the points you raised, some of our viewers will disagree with that. For instance, the reconstruction of the Southeast after the Civil War. There were still large tracts of the East that remained unreconstructed, untouched. I also saw, part of that myself when I had to go to school in that part of the country.
Some parts of the U.S. after the Civil War of the 1860s is still being rebuilt.
All right, that's fine. But one point that you have raised with regard to the philosophy of economic management that we have had in the past 58 years. Dr. Nazif Dama was talking about, the culture of planning, and you have, Dr. Obadiah Melafia, re-emphasized the fact that, look, this is something that happened, some tragedy that occurred with regard to the abandonment of planning. I want to ask Professor Kenneth, I know you were not on the system then, what was the operating philosophy that led economic planners to abandon planning and then hacking to what the Bretton Woods institutions were seeking to ram down our throats? We just became, as it were, one of the guinea pigs for some of the disastrous economic ideas that emerged from the Bretton Woods institution. The so-called SAP being one of the highlights of that.
As a matter of fact, that was in vogue then. There was no country that subjected itself to IMF borrowing that ever had anything good to say about it. It was just a question of a prescription of what the national economic model had to be, and it was just one. So one size fits all over the world. And whoever went in there came out screaming. So we are not an exception. To the point that the great legacy we had from our founding fathers in preparing the agricultural production system was to have farm settlements, to have R&D institutes, a lot of them concentrated in the Southwest that were supporting inputs, and then have a marketing board that aggregated produce. All that was missing was agro-industrial estates where those would have gone for processing capacity to build. But what was, in 1985, they did away with the marketing board. Till today, we haven't got that. Till today, we're suffering from that. Yes. So you don't have that aggregator. You don't have that, well, now Anchor Borrowers Program is trying to bring something to say, well, if you have an aggregator, then you can work, or you have an anchor, you can build, trying to build what was our legacy that was thrown away. So we haven't recovered from that. But there are many more things that have gone wrong.
Namely?
Well, you alluded to governance. Now, the foundation, an economy cannot grow beyond the foundation that it has. It's like building a house. You have a plan from an architect. Yes, that is the plan. But you also have to have a foundation. Now, that foundation, the house can be as tall or as big based on what the foundation can carry. And the example is infrastructure. I've talked about the rail, how that was bastardized, and rail was a very important thing that linked everybody in this country.
Absolutely.
The moment the rail got balkanized, people now went into their shell, and we're no longer talking about one Nigeria. They're all talking about different things because we don't have that connectivity. But all that infrastructure will determine, if we have, just as an example, half per capita of infrastructure in South Africa, just half, we would have been 3 times our GDP today.
Yes.
Let me just take one element of the infrastructure. Their power for 45 million people is 40,000 megawatts, and we had 7.5 thousand megawatts for 198 million people. Just half. So if Nigeria had about 20,000, our GDP would have tripled.
Yes.
And it's not big. But that is only one infrastructure. When you then look at all others, road, then you will see why we would explode. The power alternative is that we have the highest per capita in power consumption, power production, because of generators. That's the most expensive in the world per capita. Now, the second one, of course, is the governance that you alluded to. Now, the country will continue to shake and shake because the foundation is not. Where is the foundation? For 38 years I've lived in UK. We didn't know anything about central government or regional government, which is equivalent to state. We work with the local government. The economy is in the hands of. We don't even know when they have election, federal election. They come knocking on your door. Are you coming to vote? We don't know. The economy doesn't feel that there is a national election. Now, if you look at the local government system in Nigeria, 2-year term, subjugated to the whims of the governors, make that 5-year term so that it outlives any governor, so that it's no longer the pawn. Now, make sure that we can attract competency in the local government system so that young graduates, the PhD holders, people who aspire to go into there. Now, see what will happen. In first 5 years of our best brains, let's say 10 per local government, that is 7,440. When they go in, after 5 years, many of them will now start going for state assembly seats, essay to the governor, essay to the president, federal house. Then another 10 years. By 10 years, you see them going for senate, going for governor, going for... You will see how you will increase the asset, that is the intellectual asset, and then quality of people that will come up in the system. And then, of course, let them use their budget. When you have people of integrity, they have something to lose if they mismanage the local economy. But it's a training ground for them to actually, within 10, 15 years, have a core group of competent people who can run our economy. At the moment, we are not anywhere near there. So people have only one choice. They will tell you, what is it that they keep talking about? Not resource control. They talk about changing the constitution. Let's get it right. Let's get that foundation. That foundation is very, very shaky. And then, of course, you mentioned about half of the money we have raised in oil being at large, which is about $500, $600 billion. My brother, the easiest way to get somebody to move his money from an offshore to onshore here is for him to say, bring it in. It's 2 minutes, 1 day, 2 days. The money will come. You can fight for 10 years, go through all the hoops, and then hope that those countries where their money is making money for them and sustaining the economy will let you have those. So let us have amnesty.
Yes.
If you pay 20% or 10% of tax of whatever money you've taken, let the money come back. Exactly. And then that money will go and beef your reserves to $200, $300 billion. Everybody wants to do business with you. And then build the economy with your own money.
Dr. Nazif Daruma, let's begin to... So many issues have been thrown up already now. And apart from looking at what we did right or wrong in the past, in order to use it for what we need to be doing now, let us begin to tie some of the issues together and see what we can get from it. Before we forget about the issue of planning, why is it impossible for the present setting, the present political setting, to do a 4-year plan? After all, the plans Dr. Obadiah talked about were 4-year, 4-year, and 5-year. Even if you do a 5-year plan, it rolls over to the next administration if you're not going to be there again. So why is it a government that has a 4-year tenure? Why is it impossible to do a 4-year plan? Let's see whether we can bring planning back into the present setting as to move forward in Nigeria.
Well, you have to analyze this problem in the context of what happened in the past. Whenever IMF and World Bank came to this country for Article 4 consultation, their major thrust is on macroeconomic variables. Our major thrust as an economy that is developing is for us to be able to put policies and programs to facilitate sustainable development and prosperity. Mark you, Nigeria, with 190 million people, the biggest market in sub-Saharan Africa, is of strategic interest to every single developed country. And therefore, our own internal development and prosperity is at the expense of their own internal market, which we are providing. So nobody will consciously tell you what will make you to succeed. But the reality is, if you look at the trajectory of the national development planning culture and where we lose it, there is nothing difficult if we have the commitment, determination, and we also have the capacity to do it. But the issue is the federal government must provide the lead. At the inception of this administration, if you can recall, we have a discussion here. And one of the suggestions I did make then is that we have laboriously taken almost 18 months to develop the Vision 2020 Economic Transformation Blueprint. The dynamics, the strategic initiatives, the projects and programs encapsulated there are still relevant. But because of time, and with the emergence of the Sustainable Development Goals, I suggested that let us review the Vision 2020 to make it Vision 2030, incorporate the Sustainable Development Goals, and then from it, extract the initiatives, projects, and programs and put them into a 4-5-year medium-term national development plan, and to institutionalize it. Let us be able to go back to the National Assembly. Because when I was part of those that did the Vision 2020, we submitted a law, Development Planning and Continuity Bill, to make sure that whosoever is in power, whether it is APC, PDP, or whoever, the country needs a sustained planning culture. Now, let us institutionalize it in such a way that if you have that law, whosoever come, he cannot be able to do anything outside that planning. Every day, we give example of other developing countries that have succeeded, particularly India. India is more populated than we are. But India today is implementing its consecutive 14th 5-year national development plan, meaning for the last 65 years, the Indians have been consistent with development planning. Now, internally or externally, consistency in policy framework provide macroeconomic predictability and assurance. It is what will attract local investment. It is what will attract external investment. In the 13th National Development Plan of India, they were able to attract $1 trillion in public-private partnership. Why are people taking their money to India? It's not because they like the pace of Indians, but because the policy is right. The planning culture is consistent. There is adequate transparency in the public-private partnership policy framework. In the country today, based on the National Infrastructure Master Plan that was done by the National Planning Commission some years ago, we have over $3 trillion in terms of infrastructure deficit. Even if the price of oil is $500, we can't be able to achieve that. So we need to have a consultative framework between the federal, state, and the local governments to go back to real development planning culture where inter-coordinated development interventions will be made possible and Nigeria will be more prosperous than it is today.
All right, Dr. Dama, thank you very much. Let's return to Dr. Bedai Melafia. Dr. Melafia, one of the points raised by Professor Kenefe has to do with the state of our infrastructure. Power, for instance, which we all know, the adverse consequences it has had on the economy. But some economic historians will also remind us of the odyssey that our economic odyssey in 58 years. That it was during this period, sometimes during the military, you had the Kenji Dam, it was built, Shiroro was built, Jeba Dam was built, Ogoro, the power plant was built, aside from those that were using coal that we had in the east, somewhere around Oju River or thereabout. But you were in the central bank. In terms of superintending aspects of the economy at the central bank, and therefore recognizing the centrality of power to the economic development, what happened such that we seem to have missed the critical role that power would play and therefore made the right kind of investments, either in generation, transmission, or distribution, so that progressively things would have been a lot better rather than worsen from what we are seeing today?
Kingsley, it's a very fascinating topic. And if there is one index of our collective failure in terms of economic development, it is on the issue of power. I completely agree with my brother, Professor here, about what it could do if only we could get it right. Now, it's very complicated. Number one, we failed in terms of development planning. Because it was within the context of development planning that Kainji, Shiroro, all those things came up. Now, we've forgotten the fact that every 30 years, the population of Nigeria doubles. Every 30 years. In 1960, we were 56 million. In 1990, we were slightly over 100 million. Now we're about 200 million. And in the next 30 years, we're going to be 400 million. For heaven's sakes, Kinsley, we can't continue like this because we need to plan for 200 million additional people. Secondly, there are cartels, there are sheikhs who have a vested interest in killing the power sector. People who import diesel, people who import generators. We know them, they know themselves. To tackle this issue, you should use carrot and stick. Our ancient people, kings, used to say that a good ruler should talk very softly, but carry a very big stick. So you need to talk softly to them, but carry a very big stick that you should not hesitate to use. Thirdly was, of course, corruption. There's a time we invested something like over 18 billion on the power sector. It did not add an additional 1,000 megawatts on it. It did not. So tackling the sheikhs, tackling the issue of corruption, and modeling for the demographics and the demand for power is very key. Another element that has been ignored completely, two other elements have been ignored completely, are, first of all, transmission. Transmission is still controlled by the government, whereas distribution has been privatized to the discos. So it is an anomalous situation whereby you have one arm of it privatized and the other arm controlled. And the government will even tell you that, the power ministry will even tell you that it is not even the problem of distribution, it's even more so generation. So we need to fix the transmission problem, by privatizing it, bringing in private sector capital, bringing in private sector operators, and setting up companies in this country to produce the cables. You know, we don't produce those cables here. So we need to be able to. And then the final element I want to say, which is common sense. Common sense. That if you put a law today that all government buildings in this country must have a solar panel on top of them, do you know how much productivity that could increase in the private sector? It is not quantum physics. It is very doable. I was very encouraged a few days ago when I heard that the Ministry of Power has commissioned a company at the cost of $2.5 million to install solar panel on its own building. You could do that for all ministries, departments, and agencies of government. Think of what that could do for rural schools, for rural clinics, local governments, ministry and department. In 1 year, it will transform this country beyond any recognition. And it is practical, it is doable, and it contributes, it's off-grid, but it contributes to the sector. These are very practical things that can be done, and we should do them.
Okay, Dr. Melafia, thank you very much. Professor Volcanic, back to you. Again, we talked about infrastructure. I mean, concentration these days is on power and transportation. One other aspect to which reference is hardly made because we have all become local governments in our own sense, is water, potable water. We're all drilling for our own water and so on and so forth. But I want to leave water aside and then focus again on transportation, which is the rail system. In the 1980s, for instance, you know, there was so much noise about various economic policies and reforming railways. Indians were coming, Chinese came, they moved, they didn't do anything. Sometimes they will come, another time they will go. And then you have we had a number of economic ministers at the time, you know, during the military era, and they were saying all kinds of things. But overall, we appeared not to have moved in the right direction with regard to providing adequate transportation infrastructure. In your opinion, aside from, because they also had rolling plans, what went wrong and what lessons can we possibly learn from that era?
If you look at America, rail was, apart from steel, in fact, when they came with the steel, they needed the rail to be able to move the steel. So national rail was their key priority, to be able to move those huge steel, the 6 men that built America, to move that. That was very important. And if you look at the cheapest and most effective way for moving heavy goods over long distances, including cement, including petroleum products, including steel and all that, is by rail transport. And I want to give an example of what rail transport transformation that it could bring. If you look at Mombasa, there are several continental rail projects. There's Lamu Rail Corridor, and then there's Mombasa, all moving from the Horn of Africa across to Cameroon. Now, what does it take to connect from Cameroon to Nigeria? And then look at the opportunity that it presents. The cheapest way to bring goods into Africa from Asia, China, Japan, India, is to Mombasa. It's about $1,500 per container. Now, once you start moving them, the ship goes through Cape Coast and comes all the way to, it adds another $1,000 on it. Now, the cheapest location for a hub to get goods at cheapest point from America, Brazil, Europe, Canada, is actually Nigeria. But the reason, and that is where it could land, those containers at 1,500. But why are we paying 2,500? Is because of backhaul capacity. The containers go back empty at $500. So 500 plus 2,005 is 3,000 divided by 2. 1,005 is the economic price. Now, can you imagine this rail connecting us to Mombasa? What means that we will save in 2 days rail travel. You would save, it wouldn't cost you up to $100 to move the container. You would save at least $1,000 per container. But you also have backhaul capacity. The goods coming from the south, from the Asia, is counterbalanced by the goods coming. So we have backhaul capacity, and then you see massive development. We don't no longer, neither the ship, and we need to do this because we are now thinking about deep sea ports. Now, we'll have Lekki deep sea port, and we are building the deep sea port without building the rail to evacuate. Now, in the deep sea port, what you have is Panamax. They will come with 16,000 containers. What you have in all the Lagos seaport, Warri and all that, don't worry, Port Harcourt are just small ships that bring 4,000. They go to the high sea and then transload. That's what they do. So for the big one to come in, can you imagine 16,000 containers offloaded in a few days? How are you going to evacuate them? It's going to be chaos in Lagos. And it's not just that. We're looking at the Baka Deep Seaport, Bonny Deep Seaport, Badagry Deep Seaport. There are so many. Even Bayelsa wants Deep Seaport. How are you going to move all this stuff if you are not going to look at rail? And then, of course, combine that. So Nigeria is a big hub, maritime hub, if we start looking at all these. But you can't go anywhere without rail. You really need to have rail in the mix to be able to rapidly evacuate. And another thing is this. We can have inland container terminals, dry terminals. Not the depot. Depot is just custom warehouses. For you to have those, because they have the same status as the seaport, you can now ship goods from anywhere in the world to Kaduna, the dry port, or to just dry port. They have the same status as the seaport. So what that means is that a ship will load knowing that they're sending it to just the dry port. So when it comes, they will just, the rail will move them there. You go and clear your goods there. And you have a dry port in Maiduguri, they will go and clear Maiduguri. So all these congestions will just go. You don't need to go to Lagos or to Port Harcourt. You don't need to go there. Because your goods will arrive
and the rail, over the night while you are sleeping, the rail, the chains and chains of rail will move the containers there, and the customs have all the trade-related agencies are there to clear the goods. So all these bottlenecks are contrived against our country. Who did the contrivance? Dr. Dama. Who is responsible for the contrivance? Just one other aspect, to raise with regard to what Dr. Kenny Faye has said, and gentlemen, I would like you to respond to this. Because in terms of mental attitude, what one has observed, over time, has been particularly, again, after the collapse of the Second Republic, we saw attention being turned towards financials. It tends to be more about exchange rate management. We're talking more about exchange rate management rather than the productive sector. I mean, if you were in Lagos or in Kaduna, you could see factories that were booming. But by the mid-'80s, when we were focusing on exchange rate management, all those factories were just closing down one after the other. Are there lessons to learn from that era of economic management, for instance? Because some persons would argue that no government sets out, to do wrong, that the government would act on the best of its mental abilities and its perception of what it thinks is right for the country. Dr. Dama.
Well, just the earlier portion of your comment, there are internal conspiracies against our nation. There are also external conspiracies against our nation. And the external conspiracies could not have succeeded without internal collaborators, which is unfortunate. Secondly, if you look at any country that has achieved economic prosperity, it is the economic attitude and perception that make that country to succeed. If you look at China, 1949, if you look at China today, 2018, there is a remarkable difference. What make the remarkable transformation is because of economic management policy, but most importantly, attitude toward internal transformation and survival. Now, in the 80s, it is true, we have so many industries. Today, we are no more talking about industrialization. Our economic attention is more or less focused on the financial services industry because our economy has been deliberately transformed into an import-dependent economy, and therefore, the best thing to do is to finance importation and trading, which does not add much value to our national economy. So the reality is that we need to wake up from our deep slumber. Nobody can come and industrialize Nigeria because industrializing Nigeria will mean lose the market for already existing external interests that are entrenched here. So we need to have deliberate industrial policy. But you cannot have an industrial policy outside the context of the larger organized economic management policy framework, because industrialization does not thrive in isolation of what is expected in other sectors. As my colleagues have alluded, particularly the issue of infrastructure, particularly the renewable sources of energy, we have abundance of that. And with the liberalization of the laws relating to power generation and distribution and ring fencing, I don't see any reason why, particularly the littoral states that border the Sahara Desert in Nigeria, cannot have a coordinated or regional coordinated framework of developing massive solar power panels and wind energy that they can use for the industrial take-up of this country rather than relying on the alternative or on the normal fuel-generated sources of electricity. So we should be able to have a rethink. And the reality is that we are talking more about politics. But believe me sincerely, if we don't change our attitude toward productivity, toward consumption, you can have the most fantastic policies, but they cannot go anywhere. And that is why, in view of this, I am suggesting that we need to transform the National Orientation Agency into a full-fledged Ministry of National Orientation with offices in each local government simply to work toward productivity attitude, but most importantly, to propagate and ensure that we have the right quality of people at the lowest level of leadership and succession planning. Because whatever fantastic economic policy you do, if you don't have the leadership, you'll not succeed. Let me give you the example of China. The Central Committee of the Chinese Communist Party, they are in thousands. No single decision, and I bet to be disproved, no single decision is taken by the Central Committee of the Communist Party that does not have consultative process and input from the lowest level. No sectoral policy is undertaken in China without exhaustive, adequate, and research-oriented consultative process incorporating every single stakeholder that has anything to contribute, so that whenever a decision is taken, it's a collective decision of every Chinese. The work attitude in China is excellent. Every single Chinese is hardworking. We must imbibe hardworking attitude by every single Nigerian, so that every Nigerian can contribute positively to our economic prosperity and development.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nazif Daruma. We are discussing Nigeria's economy, the perspective towards the future, 58 years after our independence. We shall continue this discussion after this break.
If you hear a bomb explosion or gunshots of an active shooter, that might be a terror attack. At such times, always remember 3 action words: run, hide, report. Don't try to run towards the terror scene to save the situation, because there might be a second bomb blast or another attack. Run far away and take cover. Make sure you are safe first. Yes, it is in our nature to sympathize over the hurt, but remember, only trained personnel can help in such situations. When in a secured environment, promptly call relevant authorities and help will come. For anonymous reporting, call 09630-3250-5 or 0813-2222-106. If you see something, say something. Nigeria unite against terrorism. This message is brought to you by the Federal Ministry of Information and Culture.
Hear the call of change. Stand up, Nigeria. Change is here and it's going to stay. Change begins with you. Oh yeah, make we go. Go so let the change begin from within. Look at you, oh Gerula. Change begins with you and me. Change begins with me. Change begins with me. Change begins with me.
In the last few days, we have been celebrating Nigeria at 58, but beyond celebration, we have been looking at what we can take for our progress. And on today's edition, we're looking at the economy, which actually is the live wire of any government. And so we're looking at what we used to do right, what we can begin to do right now, and how we can move forward. And now, Dr. Obadiah Milafia, just over the weekend, I was discussing with a few friends, and we were looking at industries in Kaduna. And somebody said there were, once upon a time, 16 textile industries. We couldn't verify that, but on our fingertips, we were able to count 8 textile industries that were once upon a time in Kaduna. None of them exists now. How can we progress without industrialization? When all our industries are going down and we are replacing the once workers there with keke napep drivers and Okada drivers, how can this change? But let's also look at what seems to be a rumor. Is it true that Nigeria has the highest contract inflationary rate in the world? People say that for a contract in Nigeria, the rate is far higher in Nigeria than anywhere else in the world. How can a nation that grapples with that go back into industrialization?
Well, you've asked me two questions. The first one has to do with industrialization. Kaduna happens to be my home state. I think, if I recall correctly, there were up to 12 textile, highly functional, around the Kakuri area. And as school kids, we used to, during lunchtime, you see all the workers in their thousands coming out for break time. It was like a military cantonment. Then after lunch, they all go back. Kaduna was a booming city,
And if that could happen to Kaduna, you can imagine what has happened in Kano, which had double the number of.
Now, there were over 1 million people involved in the textile industry, as I recall, and it brought it so much prosperity. It created jobs and, of course, took young people off the streets and so on. So it worked very well. What killed the textiles were, again, lack of planning, smuggling, and when the Chinese came, they flooded everywhere with smuggled textile goods, which they dumped on our shores. And of course, the high costs of doing business. And then, of course, social conflict. Kaduna became like Beirut, where Muslims live in one part, Christians live in the other part, and God help you if after 6 p.m. you are caught on the wrong side. Such a barbaric way to live in the 21st century. And that is what Kaduna became. Those with money took their money, and of course Abuja was just rising, so they packed their money, came to Abuja, some moved to Lagos. The Lebanese also moved away. Anybody with serious money left Kaduna, and they left it there just like a junkyard. And it has never recovered till today. In terms of contracts, it's very interesting you say this. Our contracts tend to be extraordinarily high. The Chinese built a railway that, the one we are trying to do, cost 3 times that of what was built in Ethiopia, because the Ethiopians negotiated very well. And they also set conditions for the Chinese. All the engines, all the coaches must be assembled in Ethiopia. They provided the land. They also provided free electricity, because as you know, Ethiopia actually exports electricity. Come and build it here. We're giving you 10 years. You must teach our engineers and technicians all aspects of the rail industry and rail technology, from engines to coaches, to laying the rail tracks, to managing, to maintenance, and so on. So this is what I call smart thinking. And we have not applied the same approach, and that's where we are. And of course, cutting corners here and there. And of course, the problem with, such extortionate contract terms is that it increases rent-seeking, it boosts corruption, and in fact, in the end, you still get a very shoddy job. You still get a very shoddy job. So these are real issues. And if I may say something about the railways, to buttress what Professor Ken said, one of my greatest regrets in life is that the railways were killed. You can almost tell the year they were killed, around 1985. You know that school kids, especially federal government colleges, if you are coming from the north, going to King's College, Lagos, or going to Federal Government College, Enugu, you are given a pass. As a small kid, you just got into the train, they assigned you to a coach, somebody to look after. The kids went and they were delivered. As you arrive in the train station, there's a bus to take you to your school. Your parents never had to worry about you. From the beginning of the development of railways, people like Nnamdi Azikiwe, he was born in Zungeru. His father worked in the railways. Chukwuemeka Odumegwu Ojukwu, he was born in Zungeru because his father worked in the railways before setting off as a transporter. Late Chief Bola Ige was born in Kaduna because his father worked in the railway, was a railway man. The railways, when they boomed, Nigerians were not strangers to each other because Hausa, Fulani, Igbo, Efik, Edo, Ibibio, Birom, people lived together, worked together, intermarried. The railway system employed a lot of people. And it was easy to move goods. A Fulani man could move his cattle from Katsina to Port Harcourt, make his money, and go back safely and peacefully. People travel easily. The moment the railways were killed, we became strangers to each other. Not only were we strangers to each other, the cost of transportation became very high, so economies became more localized, and because of that, prosperity also went down. So tackling this railway deficit alone could give Nigeria a massive boom of life. And we could employ something like 500,000 youths, train them on laying tracks, set up a program over the next 20 years of putting railway networks over every major town and city in this country. It will lead to a massive boom of prosperity and jobs.
And rail tracks are not so difficult to lay. I mean, once you have the right disposition to doing that. All right, now we have some tweets that we'll take very quickly and then return to our guests with more questions. This is from a Twitter handle known as Angle Point Educational. Education and training will grow the economy, and I mean education and training, selfless education, by the way.
And Mike Anyoko says, we must diversify our economy. Kudos to the federal government. Its efforts is towards the right direction. We must invest heavily in agriculture. There must be robust policies to create jobs. We must provide conducive atmosphere for industries and private sectors to thrive. Nigerian economy has witnessed a lot of government policies over the years, all aimed at growth. The policies, though good, lack adequate implementation.
Now, Dele Jack Solomon has this tweet. Now, take it or leave it. Nigeria's agricultural, manufacturing, and mining sectors have played a continuous and significant role in the development of the country's economy. As it stands, the agricultural sector remains the most viable economic prospect for national development. Tourism is one other area where we have comparative advantage to improve our economy with less capital commitment.
And Dediro Adedotun says, if we continue to make millions of economics policies without changing our bad behavior, our efforts are useless.
All right, so those are the tweets we're going to take for this conversation right now. Gentlemen, there's one aspect that I would like us to examine as briefly as we can. Now, any visitor who was in this country, say last time, 40 years ago, 1978, and goes around different parts of the country, is unlikely to recognize most cities. Wherever you go, the skyline is changing. You are seeing more massive structures, more massive buildings, and of course, population pressure. How then do we explain this seeming paradox? Some, of course, might say, if I may just chip that in, that we have also seen an exaggeration in the inequalities amongst the different population classes. But any person, any casual observer would say, wow, this country has made progress, and yet we are still complaining about our national condition. Enugu doesn't look the way it looked 40 years ago. Benin City doesn't look that way. Lagos doesn't look that way. Entire Lekki corridor has changed. Lagos-Ibadan Expressway is changed. And then Kaduna itself is also changed. Kano is also changed. Major cities. So how then do we explain the fact that we are seeing this boom, apparent boom, in terms of physical outlook, and yet we're complaining about our economic condition? Professor Kerife and then Dama.
Well, in 58 years, it didn't take China 58 years
for Shenzhen and Shanghai and Guangzhou and Beijing to change and transform into unrecognizable skylines. So what you say is a change in Nigeria is a far cry from what has happened in those countries in far lesser years. You're talking about 20 years, 25 years, 30 years, to see countless skyscrapers, you know. So it's relative. We could have done more. We could have achieved more. But we could actually build taller buildings if we had power. We could have built much taller ones. And I agree with the doctor that actually we have to take power to the mass market. And that mass market is solar. And if you don't incentivize, private sector will keep away. Private sector wants incentive. Now let me give you an example. You or doctor, any of us are capable of having 3 solar installations, one in Abuja where you operate, one in Kaduna, your base, and then one in your village. But you can only be in one place at one time. But those solar units where you are not using are earning money for you if they were sending the energy to the grid. So that is the point. Unless power is brought to the mass market, you have to incentivize that, because in many parts of Europe, you actually get paid for the power or extra that you don't need that goes into the grid. So, and there are people who will invest those regardless, and the people who have the money to do those. So let's get them in. The main obstacle has actually been removed, because in 2005 Power Act, you can only domiciliarize one megawatt. But now they've removed that. So you can actually do anything you want and then do it locally. So leave the pressure on transmission. So transmission can be something for another day. So people can invest wherever they are. They can invest and distribute locally. You have mini grid concepts. There are lots of concepts that can take us out of this. It is a big mess, and we can get out of it.
Well, Professor Kenneth, thanks. Dr. Dama, I would like you to respond to that same question I asked a moment ago. How, do we reconcile, or how can we reconcile the seeming growth in fiscal development in different parts of the country versus our national economic condition about which we continue to complain?
Well, you see, it is individual human beings that make up an economy. It is their own effort, their own resilience that make an economy what it is or what it is not to be. It is logical. If you look back 40 years ago, that time I was in primary school, the physical transformation was insignificant. Today, the physical transformation is more. But in reality, if you look at inequality and extreme poverty in the 70s and now, the gap has widened. It is individuals within the economy and their purchasing power that actually drive the economy. If the mass of the people within an economy are living within an extremely low income bracket, their purchasing power and aggregate demand is low. It is the combination of the aggregate demand of the largest segment of an economy that drive productivity because of the demand impulses it gives to producers. Now, our income distribution has been terribly bad because we have changed our attitude from a productive-oriented economy into an import-dependent economy. So what we need to do is to be able to sit down, forget the IMF, forget the World Bank. We have economists in this country. We need to have extreme and robust consultative process. And let me give you the example. Whenever Indians want to do their national development plan, they usually start it in the 3rd year preceding an existing plan. It usually takes them 2 years. Not small meetings, 1 day, 2 days. No, extensive consultation. Look, the individuals that make up policy making that are in power don't have all the answers to the problems. They don't have monopoly of wisdom. Every single stakeholder in every sector has something to contribute to the economic prosperity of this country. And therefore, their voices must be heard. And that is when you have inclusive policy making that everybody owns. What we have now is elitist policy making that nobody owns, except the elites themselves. So we need to have that thinking. We need to have that deep-rooted consultation, sector by sector, area by area, to the lowest village, so that at the end of the day, when we come up with a national development plan, it is a national development plan that can encapsulate everybody's aspiration. There is nothing stopping us from developing mini solar grids, even at individual homes. It has happened in other countries, and other countries are making massive progress in terms of addressing the infrastructure challenge, particularly the issue of power. And we shouldn't expect anybody, and I repeat it, we shouldn't expect anybody to come and tell us this is what we need to do to make the power sector viable. We need to work as a team. And finally, I'm using this medium to appeal passionately to all our policymakers and businessmen. We need to have realistic discussion and consultation about the cost of doing business in Nigeria and cost of capital projects. We will never, and I won't be quoted wrongly, we will never develop to the aspirations that we require is in a situation whereby the cost of delivering public sector projects is 2 or 3 times higher than what it costs in other developing economies. Our policymakers and we travel everywhere, and we seem to enjoy those countries. But behind that enjoyment is the issue of national interest, patriotism, hard work, selflessness, and sacrifice by every single individual in that country to make what their country is.
Dr. Dharma, thank you very much. Let's get the closing thoughts from Dr. Obadiah Melafia. Dr. Obadiah Melafia, let me throw this in to guide your closing thoughts. Economic inequality is exacerbating in the country. Now, going forward, what needs to be done?
Well, you also had asked about cities and skylines as well as inequality. Daniel Arap Moi, former president of Kenya, I was told when he came to Nigeria on a state visit, I think Commonwealth Summit, he looked around and said, "Whoa, my goodness." He was so impressed about Abuja. He said, "Why are you complaining of corruption in Nigeria? This is where they sunk all the money in." You know, so he said that people shouldn't blame them of anything called corruption. Abuja, it looks impressive, but when you look beyond that, it is a giant officers' mess with the top generals living in Maitama and Guzape and Asokoro, and then the medium-ranking officers living in Gariki and so on, and the masses living in Jikoyi and Nyanya and so on. Massive slums are coming up, massive slums. Abuja, look, sociologists, we don't have sociologists anymore. They should study this phenomenon of urban poverty. The crisis we're having in big cities like Maiduguri and all that is partly sociological, in the sense that young people drift into the cities with nothing to do. They fall under the influence of mad mullahs who indoctrinate them and set them off to kill innocent people. The rural banditry we face has, you can see Abuja has literally doubled in 5 years. We now have a traffic problem. And because massive influx of people from the rural areas, because the rural areas have become war zones almost throughout the central part and the north. So people are moving into cities, Kaduna and so on. And it is worsening the crisis of inequality. Inequality now is deep and serious. I know the government came with some social transfer welfare schemes, but these are too small, you know, and not well organized and not well structured and not, to be very honest, not very transparent, because there should be criteria. You have to identify areas of poverty. You have to have data, you have statistics, you have an administration to manage this process, and rigorous analysis and monitoring to ensure that the whole thing doesn't fall under corruption. So we need to do more. But I need to correct, I hear this and it is getting quite annoying. Agriculture, agriculture, agriculture. I think, let's get it very, very clear. There is no nation of 200 million people that survived only on agriculture. And even I hear our policy leaders, repeating this charade like parrots. You need massive manufacturing. You need massive industrialization. Yes, at the initial stages, it should be agro-allied. It should be linked agriculture, generating surplus from the rural area, feeding into the urban industrial manufacturing sector, and inward, backward, upward linkages.
Particularly with modernization.
Absolutely. And building a base for a massive industrial revolution in this country. That is our only saving grace. If we don't do that, Nigeria will not survive.
All right, Dr. Obadiah Melafia, former Deputy Governor of the Central Bank, would like to thank you for your contribution to our discussion this morning. Our appreciation also to Professor Ken Ife, economic analyst. Thanks a lot for being around. It's always a pleasure having you. And also Dr. Nazif Dama, Associate Professor of Economics at the University of Abuja and former Director of National Planning Commission. Gentlemen, thanks a lot for being part of our conversation on the economic perspective to Nigeria's 58th independence anniversary. So that does it now for our conversation segment. Let's go very quickly to our sports desk.
Meanwhile, Aqua United head coach